Hello everybody and welcome to the Age Group Triathlon Podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I wanted to have a look at the subtle art of not crashing your bike. Now, yesterday I was marshalling at the Cotswold 113 middle distance triathlon, and a very experienced competitor from all I could tell, he came and he approached us once most of the bikes were out. And he said that he crashed his bike and he wanted to pull out and he needed to go where to go, what to do. So I was sort of chatting about this afterwards to the person that I was paired up with, that I was working with, and she said, "Did you spot how much he was shaking?" And he seemed very calm. He seemed physically fine, but he was clearly in shock. And he came across to me at least as being a very experienced competitor. And it just made me think, why don't I put together an episode on sort of how to avoid crashing your bike? Because it sounds so simple, right? It sounds like something really obvious. But I wanted to go over the different ways in which you can find yourself on the deck, different ways in which we can avoid that happening to us, and a few tips on ways to sort of, if you do find yourself on the floor, what it is that you can do to get yourself back on track. So I think probably the biggest cause of serious crashes, at least, are related to braking. So this can often be somebody's just not braking soon enough approaching the corner. And I know, I'm guilty of this myself. I remember I was racing the London Duathlon, closed roads event in Richmond Park, and I was coming down Dark Hill towards Kingston Gate, for those who know it, and there was a cyclist who I was looking to pass. And I seemed to have forgotten that I was a cyclist taking part in a bike race and still had a 5k run to go, and seemed to think that I was a Formula 1 driver coming to the swimming pool chicane trying to outbrake my opponent. And I left my braking too late. By the time that I applied my brakes, which was on my TT bike, and I find that you just sort of the levers on a TT bike, they don't tend to be as modular. It's a cable brake, and it is very easy to grab too much brake. And as I was trying to brake in time for the roundabout after overtaking this chap, I ended up locking up my rear wheel and going into this slide down the hill. And I must have been doing, 20 miles an hour, because I was already braking by this point, but, over 20 miles an hour, and my rear wheel starts sliding out. Which, it's a bit scary, isn't it? I think it ended up in a little bit of a fishtail, but I managed to catch it and continue on. My issue there was I nearly crashed because I didn't brake early enough. I didn't brake soon enough. We aren't racing drivers. We aren't racers in a crit who are trying to, eke out every single kind of inch that we can, every advantage that we can. We're triathletes, and this race is going to be dictated by our legs. Now, when we are just out training on the road, if we do not brake early enough for a corner, there's a good chance we'll just run out of road. So we'll come way too hot into this corner. We won't brake nearly soon enough. And one of two things will happen. Either we will head off-road, into the hedge, into the ditch, wherever that may be, whatever the hazard is. If you're really unlucky, it could be a brick wall. Okay, that's not great. But even worse than heading into a brick wall is if you are doing a left-hand turn in the UK or right-hand turn in the rest of the world, well, most of the rest of the world, and you end up on the wrong side of the road, because you simply ran out, you couldn't stop soon enough, and you've gone out onto the wrong side of the road. Now, most of the time, you should be able to get away with this. But if you're really unlucky, that could be as a large vehicle is coming around that corner, and that's going to end extremely poorly for you. So you do need to make sure that you are braking nice and soon, nice and early, because that also reduces the risk of you locking up your front brake, which is another popular cause of people getting themselves in trouble with and crashing, is that somebody applies, sort of too much rear brake. You can catch that if you have been riding bikes long enough. It makes me sound big-headed, but if you're good enough at bike handling, you can catch a rear skid. If you lock up your front wheel, there is nothing you can do. nothing you can do. You are going flying over your handlebars. Now, some people will have memories of doing this as children, and I know a lot of parents, they will make sure the front brake on their bike is very loose, so they don't lock up their front brake. And some cyclists will also do that even as adults. They go, oh, I need to make sure my front brake isn't too tight because I don't want to go over my handlebars. Now, I have an issue with this because sometimes we do really need to stop very quickly, and if we have dialed our brakes right back to avoid us from going over the handlebars, that can actually place us in more danger in the long run if we're not allowed to stop at time at, say, like a junction, and we overshoot the give way line or the stop line and we get hit by a car because we backed our front brakes off because we didn't want to run the risk of going over our handlebars. Now, personally, if I was coming down a hill towards a junction, I didn't spot in time, I have to slam on the anchors to try and prevent myself from going into traffic, I would rather somersault off of my bike than be hit by a car, personally. So I don't recommend that somebody really backs off. You need to find the sweet spot for you, but you need to make sure that you confidently stop in time. But again, we do want to avoid having to go over our handlebars. Now, this happened to me over 10 years ago now, actually. I think it was 2015. I was in a group ride and we were going downhill. And we approached... Now, the chap who was on the front apparently is used to riding motorbikes. And we approached a side road. And apparently when you're riding a motorbike in a group and you're approaching a side road, you back off in case a car appears and pulls out on you, which I guess sort of makes sense. But he did this, he was in the group and he braked, and the bikes in front of him were like, what are you doing? And like swerved around him to avoid going into the back of him. And this chaos went further up the chain through the group. And my first knowledge of what was happening was when I watched the rider in front of me go over her handlebars. Next thing I know, I'm lying in the middle of the road. We were going downhill, I was doing about 40k an hour at the time. And I remember just feeling very confused and why am I in the road? Why am I not on my bike? And obviously, the shock of it all. My helmet was completely smashed up. I'm grateful I was wearing it that day. And that was because I applied too much front brake. Now this was, I panicked. I saw a rider in front of me go over their handlebars. I panicked. I applied too much front brake. I was going very fast. I needed to stop very quickly. This is just one of these things, and that incident has, as well as others, has put me off riding in groups, really. Because you have a lot of people who just don't know what they're doing, and the risks are just that much higher than when you're riding solo. Now, I recommend that you practice, if you're new to cycling and you're nervous, you practice braking hard. Now, I want you to get up to speed and then practice coming to a smooth, controlled stop. Okay. Now, there's something that I do if I am running a face-to-face session with a cyclist, which is incredibly rare these days, but it's something I've done in the past, is set up some cones. So 2 cones, and they start off about sort of 10, sort of 5 meters apart, and go, I want you to ride towards these cones, and I want you to start braking when you reach that first cone. I want you to be completely stopped by the time you reach the second. And over the course of that session, we move the cones progressively closer together until somebody is really well practiced at coming to a smooth, controlled stop. Now, sometimes we just need to slam on the brakes. That's just how it goes. We really do have to avoid a hazard at the last minute, and we are going to run the risk of going over our handlebars. Something we can do to avoid this, and it can be instinctive if you practice it enough, is when you brake, is to throw your weight over the rear wheel. So you get out of the saddle, just lift yourself out of the saddle and stick your bum over the rear wheel to act as a counterbalance, And this can really help reduce the risk of you having to go over your handlebars like that. It is not something that is sort of proven to work, but if you have enough weight on the back of the bike, then you may prevent yourself from doing the full somersault. Now, the most popular, I think, reason for, if we're looking at number of crashes that occur in the world of road cycling, I think it has to go to clipless pedals. The reason being is that so many people have lots of little small tumbles when they're learning to ride with clipless pedals. that the sheer volume of these little crashes, which for the most part completely innocuous. Okay, you might lose a bit of paint from your bike, but you might scratch up your shorts a little bit, but that's probably the worst thing that's going to happen. But what can we do to reduce the chances of us crashing with clipless pedals? Now, obviously, teaching somebody to use clipless pedals from scratch, is a little bit of a complex topic, but here are a few tips. So you want to make sure that you loosen the pedals as much as you possibly can. Most clipless pedals will have a little bolt in there that you need to loosen as much as possible, which will allow you to get in and out of the cleats really easily. Why would somebody want to have the cleats much higher, you may ask? Well, if somebody is taking on a sort of a race where they don't expect to unclip at all for the entire event, but they have stronger legs and they're experienced to do that, or if they have cleats that are slightly worn and they need to be held into the pedal more aggressively, that may be a reason for it. But if you are new, even if I get a brand new set of cleats and install them in a new set of pedals, I really struggle to unclip for those first few rides. It really catches me out because the cleats are not worn down at all. They are fresh and the springs are they got that full tension in them. Now, once you have done a little bit of riding in these pedals and these cleats, it's simply a case of a little twist of the ankle and you unclip. Whereas when they're fresh, it is a little bit more of an ordeal. And if you have sort of weak hips and knees and feet, okay, that's not going to help either. So remember, there's nothing saying that you need to ride with clipless pedals, okay? I would really encourage people to just ride with flat pedals if that's what they want to do. It is completely fine. You don't actually lose a huge amount of efficiency or power. The biggest benefit for clipless for me is the ability to accelerate fast without having the pedal come around and hit you in the shin. That's pretty priceless if you ask me. But if you're just training for your first triathlon, don't feel the need to go with the clipless pedals just because everyone else is using them. If your first triathlon is a slightly longer race and you've got a long time to go, then yeah, you probably want to learn to use these. It is the most efficient way to get round. But if you are approaching, you're doing your first ever triathlon in a couple of weeks, don't feel that you have to learn how to use clipless pedals. Because if they do increase the risk of you having a little bit of a tumble, then that's going to offset any benefits. Now, when people are riding with clipless, especially when they're starting to get used to them, I say, look, imagine unclipping your foot is a bit like covering the brake pedal in a car. So if you're approaching some traffic lights and you're worried that they're about to turn red, or if you are in a situation where you're worried that someone might walk out in front of you, you're not necessarily applying the brake, you're just getting ready to stop if you need to. And that's the same with unclipping your foot. Now, as you get better, as those pedals and those cleats loosen up a little bit and you just become more confident with it, you can probably get to the point where you no longer need to do this. And as you're braking, you can unclip your foot. But when we're starting off, it's better to have your foot unclipped and ready to put down on the floor if needs be, than having to sort of really panic. And it is a little bit of a rite of passage of anyone who's getting used to clipless pedals, where they are approaching, they're slowing down, getting ready to stop, and they're trying desperately to unclip, and they panic and they can't get their feet out, and this may result on them sort of crashing over on their side at a very low speed with very little damage done. Doesn't stop it being really embarrassing though. So that is something that we want to avoid, and that is mainly just due to experience, just riding around. Now, I recommend if you have an indoor trainer that you get used to riding with those cleats indoors, clipping in, clipping out, riding on the turbo trainer, or if you're taking your cleats outside, have one cycling shoe on one side and one trainer on the other. So in the UK, it's generally best practice to put your left foot down when you stop, because there are no cars passing you on the left, and that way a car isn't going to run over your foot. So you have a cycling shoe on your right foot and you have a trainer on your left foot. And that means that you can always put that foot down to stop. When you get to traffic lights, unclip or remove your left foot from the pedal. Keep your right foot clipped in. You don't need to unclip both feet. It's something that I did. It's something that a lot of people will do because that's what they're used to doing when they're riding out normally on flat pedals. Put both feet down at a junction. We just want to lean the bike to one side, put a foot down on the ground, and then get ready to go again. Now, by keeping one foot in, that means that if you then go to clip your foot into the pedal and you miss, you can still cycle with you still pedal with just your right foot. Okay, you can get yourself up to speed, just pedal with the right foot until you get up to enough speed where you can try to put that left foot in again. Okay, it is a bit of trial and error here. It does take some getting used to. If you're nervous, start riding on a softer surface such as short grass until you get the hang of it. Now, the first two that I've covered so far, these have primarily been for sort of athletes who are a little bit newer to the sport. Those who haven't quite mastered the art of braking, those who are new to clipless pedals. These are the ones sort of most likely to take a tumble. But when somebody starts getting faster, when somebody starts sort of pushing the limits, I think that sort of the most common cause of a crash in these cases is a lack of grip. So it's when they go around a corner and they haven't got enough grip and their bike slides out underneath them. And if I were to wager, I guess, I imagine that's probably what happened to this chap yesterday. Now, it could be that he didn't really do anything wrong. It could be that he just hit a bit of road in the way it sort of quite a lot of speed and the grip in his tyre just sort of let go. If there was a bump in the road or something like that he wasn't expecting. Sometimes these things just happen, unfortunately. But if we are talking about somebody who's going around a corner that is flat, the road's in good condition, what is it that can contribute towards this poor grip and that may cause a bike to slide out? Now, the first one is cheap or worn tyres. So the tyres that came on your bike, unless you paid sort of $7-8 upwards on the bike, those tyres are probably rubbish. And that's a way for them to keep the price down on the bike. So you've heard me say this on the podcast multiple times, buy yourselves some good tyres, okay? Because these are worth their weight in gold. If you have a good tyre, it will be much grippier and you'll be much less likely to crash. Another issue is somebody's pressure being too high or too low. Now, this is a bit confusing because we can end up in a bit of a sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't situation. So when is the pressure too high? When is the pressure too low? And when might that become problematic? So if we are riding somewhere like Switzerland on a warm day where the tyres, the road's absolutely beautiful, silky smooth, good quality, it's warm. If we are riding a tyre with a high pressure, we'll probably do really well. In fact, if you look at bikes that are raced indoors in the velodrome on the track, then they will be running those tyres close to 200 psi in some cases. Tubular tyres about 200 psi because this rolls the best and it is going to give them good grip on the surface, and that is the optimal way to go about it. Now, unfortunately, if we are riding on roads that are less than perfect, that high tyre pressure can go against us because rather than the tyre having this perfect, beautiful contact with the surface, instead, if you look at your average bit of tarmac, if you were to take a macro photo or you run your hand across it, you realise that actually it's really quite bumpy. And if we've got loads of pressure in our tyres, then that means that the tyres, that there's no chance for the tyre to fill in those those little micro gaps in the tarmac. And instead, the tyre just rolls over the very top of that surface. And so we think we're in contact with the whole road, where really we're just in contact with that very upper layer. And depending on how worn the road is, this may actually give us a really small contact patch. So your contact patch is how much of your tyre is actually in contact with the road. Now, the lower our tyre pressure, the greater the contact patch is, okay? Because as we start to reduce pressure, we go from only having a very thin line, part of the tyre, in contact with the road. We reduce the pressure and the tyre gets a little bit flatter, gets a little bit lower, and that rubber, it meshes a lot better with the surface of the tarmac. giving us more grip. Now, the downside to this is that if we lower our pressure too much, then we lose rolling resistance, means that it's going to make our tyres feel really sluggish. We're going to have to work a lot harder to go anywhere than if we had high pressure in our tyres. Think about a mountain bike tyre that will normally be at a fraction of the pressure of a road bike tyre. Quite often they might be around kind of 35-40 psi, a mountain bike tyre, and due to the fact they've got all of the grip on the tyre, the contact patch there is much smaller, but that low pressure, the fact it's a really big wide tyre, it's all going to work and it's going to make that tyre really slow. The fact that the mountain bike has probably got suspension doesn't help because you lose power transfer through there. But we are going to be looking at having a pressure that's too low, also causing us issues. So what is the right tyre pressure? Well, I wish I had an answer for you, because it varies from person to person, bike to bike, setup to setup, weather to weather, where you are in the world. There is no hard and fast answer. Now, if you listened last week, you will have known that I got caught out. I got a pinch flat in my race a couple of weeks ago because my pressure was too low. Now, as a lighter rider, I can get away with running a lower tyre pressure, whereas heavier riders, they will need to have a higher tyre pressure. So this whole subject, it really is a bit of a minefield, if I'm honest. So I do highly recommend that if you're interested in learning more about tyre pressures, you do sit down, do some real research on what the right tyre pressure is. But for you, and it depends on the tyres you're running, of course, as well. One tip I would leave you with is that if you're riding in the rain, I want you to take probably 5 psi, maybe 10 psi out of your tyres. This will give you a bigger contact patch with the road and it will improve your grip in the wet and should help you stay upright. We can also end up losing grip if we hit a surface that is especially smooth and or wet. Now, I remember when I first started, long before I started doing triathlon, I was cycling around in London. And I remember I just found myself on the floor in the middle of the road. And I was like, what the hell happened? I looked behind me and there was a drain cover that was wet. Sorry, it was a drain itself that was wet. And obviously I hit that drain at an angle at which the grip just disappeared out from underneath me. And if you watch cyclists riding through sort of Europe professional cycling, or even if you watch motorsport, you'll see people, riders, drivers, if they are braking and they try to turn on that sort of white paint that you get. Now, in the UK, I think that given the amount of rainfall that we have, that paint actually has an amount of sand in it to help it be grippy. But I know that in some parts of the world they don't. And that paint is super slippery, especially in the wet. And if people end up on that, then they can really lose sort of grip quite quickly. So do bear that in mind. Especially if you are, say, a Brit travelling and doing a race in the continent, you may associate this white paint, these white markings, with having some form of grit and grip there. That may not be the case. It may actually have all the grip of an ice rink. On the subject of ice, that's something that I haven't touched on, and it's not in my notes because it's June when I'm recording this. If you are riding and there's a risk of ice on the road, I suggest you turn around and go home. Because it's really hard to spot black ice. It's incredibly difficult to be able to see where it is, identify it, and if you hit black ice, good night, goodbye, you're crashing your bike. The risk just isn't worth it. In the age of interactive turbo training, I highly recommend that you do not ride when there's a risk of ice. The risk of crashing is just too high. We can also lose grip when cornering if we hit some kind of debris in the road. So this could be oil, this could be gravel, anything that's on the road that is going to interfere with your level of grip. And it's really hard to spot something like this. If there is oil, if there's petrol spillage in the road, it's impossible to spot it. Sometimes you just run out of luck. And I'm afraid to say that crashing, like if you ride a bike for long enough, you're going to crash. Now, I've been lucky. I think it's been about 8 years since I've had a crash. That's a pretty good track record. The fact that I don't spend as much time out on the roads that I used to, in that A, I'm not training as much as I used to, and B, I'm doing a higher percentage of my riding indoors. But still, I'd like to think that's a pretty good track record. But I know that I'm going to crash again. Because sometimes you will just come across things like this, and it's nothing you can do. It's not your fault. Now, obviously, the faster that you're going into that corner when you hit that, the worse the outcome is going to be. We can also lose grip in a corner if we are leaning the bike too much. If we're too aggressive with how we lean the bike, we can end up with the contact patch being much smaller and maybe less grippy because the tyres maybe aren't expected to be in contact with the road at such an extreme angle. But also, we run the risk of our pedal clipping the ground as we do so, and when that happens, you're completely cooked. You will end up crashing. It's just one of those things, and it's something that a lot of people who ride bikes aggressively, it's a mistake they make once. So if you are cornering, you are leaning the bike in around the corner, make sure that the pedal that is on the inside of the corner is raised. Okay, rather than that one being low, that one is raised. Now, some people will say you should keep that lower pedal closer to the ground and the outside leg should be higher because that's sort of a bit faster. I would always err on the side of safety. I would always say keep that. You want to avoid the risk of clipping the ground with your pedal as you lean the bike. And so not pedaling, coasting around that corner with the pedal higher above the ground is the way to do it, in my opinion, especially as a triathlete. Another cause of crashing is punctures. So I'm going to share with you a little story. Again, I think this actually might be the last crash that I had, in that I was riding in a group and we were all riding. I didn't even know these guys, but I was riding along and they asked if I wanted to tag along. And I thought, sure, why not? I'd literally been with these guys for less than a mile. We go along this road out of Kingston into Surrey. And I'm following their wheels, and suddenly there's a big bang. And turns out there was a pothole that nobody else decided that they were going to bother to point out to me. And so I found myself there. I wasn't at the back of the group, I was second from the back of the group. But I was riding along and we were doing about 40k an hour. We weren't hanging around. And I had this big hit. I thought, oh, geez, that was unpleasant, but, keep going. And then probably like 50 metres later, there's a short left-hand turn that we did. And I went round this corner and my bike just completely washed out and I ended up on the deck. What happened? Well, I had a puncture. I got a pinch flat from whacking that pothole. I know, another pinch flat. From whacking that hole, it punctured my inner tube. I didn't realise that I had a puncture because I was going fast, I was focused on the wheels, all this, and I went into that corner expecting to have a fully inflated tyre when I had no front tyre, with predictable outcomes. So that really was, it was very painful. Picked up a lot of road rash from that. A bike shop that I was working for at the time, they used to do a van run that went down that road, so I got them to pick me up in the van, like I was a delivery, to take me back so I could get home. But it was basically a result of a puncture that I crashed. Now, if you are riding, if you get a immediate flat tyre, so if you, say, go over a nail or a screw or something like that and you get that hissing, it's pretty obvious what's happened. But sometimes you get more of a slow puncture. So it could be that, if you take the time to actually, if you take all the air out of your tyre and you go round it when it's on a bike stand and you have a look at the wheel, you will probably see lots of bits of flint and the like that are embedded inside your tyre and are slowly making their way through their tyre into your inner tube. You need to go around periodically, once every few months, with a set of tweezers or a screwdriver or something like that. And you need to prise these out before they make their way through. But if one does make it through, and it does make its way through the puncture protection, and it punctures your inner tube, this could end up with what's called a slow puncture, where because the item is still embedded in there and it's holding the air in there slightly, only a low amount of air is escaping. which can be really frustrating because you think that you fixed a puncture, but then it happens again because the item is still in there. Now, if you have this slow puncture, then you do have a much higher risk of crashing, because you'll be riding along thinking you're riding a perfectly mechanically sound bike, and you'll go around a corner, but at that point you will have lost enough pressure that you don't really have the grip that you're looking for, and you wash out. It's not ideal, it's not good at all. So what I want you to do is I want you to really pay attention to the handling of the bike and the vibrations you feel through the bike. Now, there's a section of the M25 from the A3 heading towards the M3, and it is concrete, and when you hit it, you always feel like you've got a puncture because there's a thud, 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 thud as you're going along, as you go over this concrete. And it didn't matter how many times I drove that bit, I always was worried that I had a puncture when I hit it. And the same is true with cycling. If you start to get this thudding sensation starting to come through the bike, or it just doesn't turn as much as you want to, pull over, give the tyres a squeeze. There's a good chance that one of them will be a lot softer than you're expecting. In that case, take the tyre off, take the wheel off. With the tyre off, run your fingers gently around the inside of the tyre. See if you can find what it is that's causing the issue. Because if you can't, then you just have to put the inner tube in and hope for the best. But if you can find a little bit of flint or a little bit of a metal or something through there, a thorn maybe even, that has punctured the tyre and has caused a slow puncture, you need to remove that, put the inner tube in, and you're back in business. Another cause of crashing is riders hitting curbs. Now, this can be for one of two reasons. Firstly, it can be because somebody is riding too close to the curb. And this is a classic mistake of the very new cyclist who thinks, oh, I just want to stay out of the way of the cars and I ride as close as I can to the curb. Where the more experienced cyclist is going, well, I'm going to ride here in a considerate position and you're going to have to really think about how you work around me. Because if you place yourself really close to the curb, drivers will try to squeeze past you when there isn't really enough space, increases the risk of accident. So I do recommend against that. The other reason for this is if somebody is trying to ride up a curb. So if somebody is trying to sort of move onto a bike path or something like that, and they try to bump up onto the pavement, or anything similar that they're trying to, if there is sort of a little bump that they're making their way over, you want to make sure that you hit this head on. Okay, now it has to be, because if you hit it at an angle, that is going to really increase the risk of you crashing, and you also want to try to lift your front wheel off the ground, just pull it off the ground a little bit as you approach that to bump yourself onto that curb. Start with really low stuff and build yourself up. It is a useful skill to have with urban cycling, to be able to bump up and move your way around different urban environments, because sometimes a lot of routes cycle past and like they really aren't very well designed. But yeah, if you are a bit sloppy with how it is that you mount these curbs, that can result in a crash as well. Potholes are a massive issue for cyclists. Now, I've already told you two stories about how I got a puncture, a pinch flat from hitting a pothole. But let's be honest, I got off quite lightly both times because I didn't end up going down and sort of really hurting myself on the pothole. I didn't end up with major damage to my bike. Actually, no, I did. I did get a new wheel after that question. I'm telling a lie. But hitting a pothole is always bad news because it can just throw you from the bike completely. What we need to do to try and avoid this is to keep our eyes on the road and keep scanning ahead for hazards. Now, I know it's really difficult, especially as you start to get tired. You want your head to drop, trying to focus, look at the rear wheel as you try grinding up that hill, but you really do need to try and keep your glance up the road. Try to spot any hazards before they arrive. Now, I think that the majority of times that I've hit potholes has been where there's been sort of dappled sunlight or it's been in shadow, and it's that bit harder to spot. Sometimes you don't realise a pothole is there until the very last minute. Now, if you spot a pothole at the very last minute, it's probably not safe for you to just swerve around it because you may be hit by something else overtaking you, or if you sort of really get it wrong, you could end up swerving so hard that you actually crash because your rear wheel sort of skids out. because you've made such a change in direction. You'd have to be going pretty fast to do that, but it's not impossible. Sometimes in these cases, it is better to just sort of brace for the hit rather than try to take evasive action. If you've got less than sort of a meter to take avoiding action. In that case, I want you to hold the bars firmly, but not give them a death grip. Okay, you want to be that. You want to get ready to absorb the impact. Take your weight off of the saddle a little bit so that your genitals don't get a battering. As you go, and then you just sort of lift yourself out the saddle a little bit, brace for that impact. Let the bike, you want to make sure the bike is still going to point forwards, but also sort of let it go where it wants to go rather than you trying to really rigidly hold it, because that does increase the risk of crashing. It's a bit like tire pressure. If you hold the handlebars too rigidly, then the bike isn't able to go where it wants to go and you increase the risk of crashing. If you hold the bars too loosely, then the bike is just going to go wherever the hell it wants to go and you'll probably crash. So it is a little bit of a dark art, and it's one of these things that you pick up over time. And sometimes with these, the only way that you learn is by getting it wrong a few times, I'm afraid to say. A classic hazard, at least in the British countryside, are branches in the road. Now, these will fall out of trees that will be above the path or to the side of the path, and they'll be lying across the road. And if I'm honest, these can be more dangerous than potholes, depending on the size of the branch and the like. And that if I came up to a branch in the road, that's a physical branch in the road, I would actually be more inclined to slam on the... And I sort of didn't spot it until the last minute. If I was distracted, if I was looking at my cycle computer, if I wasn't paying attention, if I dropped the ball, I look up, there's a branch in front of me, I would rather slam on the brakes, shift my weight backwards to avoid myself, go over the handlebars and just try to avoid going into that branch at all costs, rather than just sort of going, right, well, I'm just going to go through this. Because you will crash if you do this. And if you slam on the brakes, you might not crash. But really, because these are normally quite large, the ones that are problematic at least, just by keeping your eyes up the road, you can spot these early. And if you're in a group, as with any other hazard, point it out, call it out, branch in road, point to the left, move out to the right, so everybody knows to avoid that there's a hazard to the left and they need to move out to the right. That dovetails me nicely quite into my next chapter, which is on riding in a group. Now, riding in a group is significantly more dangerous than riding solo. For triathletes, it can be social, it can be fun, it can be good, but I do recommend against doing too much of it, because on race day, you're going to be going full pelt. You're not going to be stopping. You're not going to be waiting at the top of hills. Okay, you are going to be really struggling to be able to make sure that you're able to, to keep pushing those pedals around non-stop. If you're used to stopping every 10 kilometers to allow people to regroup. Now, it can be fun. It can be motivating to be able to go out and ride in a group, especially when the weather's not so great. And every hill can turn into a little bit of a mini race, which isn't great either. But if you are going to head out on a group ride, then you need to make sure that you clearly signal your intentions. So if you are slowing, you call out slowing, and then you start braking. If you're going to stop, you shout out stopping, and then you stop. If you are going to be moving out around a hazard, you normally place your hand behind your back with the finger pointing in the direction you're going to move to give riders behind you information that you're about to change direction. Now, what I do recommend is that you avoid trusting anyone who you don't know well. Okay. Now, if you know the riders in a group really well, you can sit there, you can draft on their wheels, and you can have a lovely time. Okay, and it'll be great. You can trust that, you trust them. While mistakes do happen, generally speaking, things are okay. If it's a complete stranger, you don't want to be there inches from their rear wheel, because you don't know when they might stop suddenly, do something really erratic, unpredictable, and you crash. There is a rule in cycling crashes, broadly speaking, front wheel loses. So if there are two riders that clip each other, normally it's the one whose front wheel was involved who ends up suffering the worst. Again, there are exceptions to everything, but broadly speaking, that is the issue that we have. So you want to make sure that, if you were to go into the back of them, they may well end up being fine, but you'd end up on the deck. So give them space, okay? Especially on descents. If you don't know somebody, don't trust them with your bike and your ability to complete your race and all of that, going down into these, these tight, twisty roads, downhill, or even on the flat and fast. If you're going to be riding behind somebody at close to 30 miles an hour, you better trust them. Something I want you to avoid doing on group rides is half wheeling. And this is where one rider is unhappy with the pace, and they're at the front of the group and they try riding a bit faster to try and push the pace out. And this involves wheels overlapping where they shouldn't be. So somebody's trying just to like push the pace a little bit, just pushing them forward. And that results in overlapping wheels, and that really does increase the risk of a crash, okay? Not only is it rude, it's also unsafe. So we don't half wheel. If you're unhappy with the pace, you have two options. Mention it to the ride leader, see how they feel about things. 2, if you're still unhappy with the pace, ride home on your own. Okay? There is no law that you have to ride with other cyclists. Okay? You can just head off on your own at your own pace rather than trying to push the pace of that group. Next up, I have some tips for urban cycling, or sort of cycling in traffic generally. Now, the first one, always obey red lights, stop signs, give way, all of that. I know it can be tempting to think, I'm on a bike, I don't have to follow the rules, I can't get a ticket. But there are two problems with this. One, you might end up being knocked off your bike, and there are plenty of people who've been killed by blowing red lights. The second problem with it is that it casts all cyclists in a bad light. So if one person, if a driver's going along and they see a cyclist go through a red light, they'll be going, oh, bloody cyclists. Even if it was kind of, a relatively safe move for them to make, it just generates, bad will against cyclists, and they will then take that out on the next cyclist they see by passing them closer than they should, or something like that. So just don't do it. Just wait for the time to be able for the lights to turn green and for you to continue on your way legally. Now, in the UK, you're allowed to filter, which is you're allowed to pass slow-moving traffic on the left-hand side or down the middle of the lane, as well as to the right, obviously. I know this isn't legal in all countries, so always check the country's laws, because the last thing you want to do is do something that other road users aren't going to expect. But I always had a rule when I was cycling in London, which is that I would happily filter through traffic, but as soon as I reached a car that started moving, I would stop filtering and I would ride with the traffic rather than trying to undertake a moving car. Because they are expecting you to pass them on the right if you're going to pass them at all. They could move over to the side of the road to avoid a pothole or some broken glass or something. Filtering is fine, it's broadly quite safe, but don't try and filter through moving traffic as a cyclist, is my recommendation. Now, there is the golden rule of all golden rules in urban cycling, and that is never pass a large vehicle on the inside. Because you are going to end up, if and when it turns a corner, you'll end up on what's called a disappearing wedge, where you'll be riding along and there'll be this gap, but as that vehicle makes that turn, you're going to run out of road, and you're going to probably end up being dragged underneath that vehicle. Now, a lot of fleets have upgraded the designs of their vehicles. So they have sort of boards down the side of them, in the UK at least, to avoid pedestrians or cyclists from getting dragged underneath. But you will still have a really horrible day that is at the very least going to involve some broken bones. So when you are riding out and about, never pass a large vehicle on the inside unless you are 100% sure that you can finish that pass, you can get past that vehicle and far enough in front of it so that the driver can see you, because the visibility of these things is awful. If you go to a cycling event, or you ever get the chance to sit in a HGV, often the police will have it. You can come along, sit in the HGV, and you will have a look in the mirrors and out the front of the bonnet, and you will be able to get a good idea of what the driver actually has visibility-wise. It's really poor. Now they are introducing cameras in the age that we're in right now, which is improving the visibility, which is a massive help. But you need to assume that unless you are a good 10 meters in front of a large vehicle, they can't see you. Okay, so you really are dicing with death here. Now I've had it before. I thought to myself, I can get past this lorry, get past this HGV, and I start undertaking them, and then they start moving. And what I did every time, if I found myself in this situation, is I stopped moving and I bumped my bike up onto the curb and let it overtake me. Because I am not getting in a fight with a heavy goods vehicle. It is not worth it for the sake of saving a few seconds. Speaking of large vehicles, I really recommend against drafting them, because it's really tempting. This thing's punching a massive hole through the air, and you could relatively effortlessly ride behind them at 30 miles an hour or more without much issue. But if they then tap the brakes, you're going to the back of them. If they, like a bus that then slows and turns around to pick up some passengers, you're in trouble. It really is not worth the risk. Is it fun? Yes. Is it also quite likely to result in your untimely demise? Yes. So just don't do this. It's bad enough when it's a car and you can see through sort of the windows and see what it is that you're looking at. But if you are sat there inches away from the back of a bus or from a heavy goods vehicle, you have no idea when they're about to slow, when they're about to turn, anything like that. You really are taking your life into your own hands. When you approach a junction or a roundabout where you have right of way, I always make an effort to make eye contact with the driver, because I want to know that they have seen me. Because if you think that driver may have missed you, you are going to need to be prepared at the very least to take some evasive action. Maybe unclip your shoe, cover your brakes, whatever is required. Sometimes they will see you, make eye contact with you, and they just pull out in front of you anyway. It's always a risk. And it's one that, if you have a camera on your bike and somebody does that to you, send that footage off to Operation Snap, okay, and get them some points on their license if they are aggressively pulling out in front of you. But for the most part, you just need to expect the unexpected. I think you need to. This is why I think that being a cyclist made me a much better driver. Is I spent much more time looking around at what other cars are doing, what other road users are doing, rather than thinking about me. Before I started cycling, I was thinking, okay, I'm in my car and I'm trying to get to this place. How can I get there quickest? Whereas when I started cycling, I go, okay, well, I'm in my car here, but there's this car in this lane. He's checking his mirrors. It looks like he might want to change. There's somebody approaching a zebra crossing coming from over there. There's a car there. It looks like he might be about to pull out of that space. If you're just anticipating things, if you're looking ahead, if you're expecting everyone around you to do really stupid things, your chance of being caught up in a crash are massively reduced, because you're not there going, I've got right of way, I'm going to continue, because and just in complete trust that they're going to stop and they're going to let me through. Because that rarely works. That rarely happens. What you really need to do is just keep on your toes at all times, especially in built-up urban environments where everyone is trying to change lanes, make turns, there's lots of pedestrians, okay? You're always scanning, always trying to predict what's about to happen. And while this isn't technically a tip to avoid crashing, it's still a tip to avoid you getting hurt. Don't get into altercations with drivers. Don't give them the finger. Don't give them rude gestures. Don't shout at them. There was this one time where this guy, he overtook me. And he really squeezed me into some parked cars in his van. I had to whack the side of his van so that he knew that I was there, and he got out and had a word with me about it. And I can't remember what happened. I think I just sort of sat there, sort of tried to explain. Anyway, whatever happened there. I think I had quite a lot of adrenaline going through me at the time. Try and do everything you can to avoid escalating a situation. It could be that they were in the wrong and that it put you in a lot of harm. Okay? If this is something you encounter a lot, then like I say, have a camera on your bike, send the footage off and see if you can get some action taken against that driver. But don't try and pick a fight, because a lot of people who drive cars, they're really very angry people. They think they're the centre of the world. I know this is great. I'm tarring lots of people with the same brush. Hey, I'm a driver myself. But a lot of them, they're just very self-important, and they think that anyone who slows them down, they have the right to do whatever they want to them. These are people who are unhinged. But unfortunately, there's a high enough percentage of people who think like this that you just have to look out for yourself, and you just have to protect yourself. Take a note if a driver really does something dangerous to you, but please don't sit there and start getting to an argument with them through their window. Don't sort of smash their wing mirror off or anything like that. You are just putting yourself at unnecessary risk. If you're interested in all this, have a look back at episode 5, I think it is. Have a chat with one of my clients, Stu, and he, as a serving detective in the Met, he shares his tips on sort of how to stay safe and protect yourself when you're out cycling on the road. Now, some tips for more advanced triathletes. So, issues that you can encounter that may make you crash if you are really pushing the limits and you're trying to do really well at your race. So, the first one is speed wobbles. If this generally happens when you're descending, if you hit over sort of 60-70 kilometers an hour, so you can end up with the speed wobbles. And from what I understand, from my limited sort of research and reading I've done on it, nobody is exactly sure about what causes the speed wobbles. But all we know is that you'll be going along at a speed, and suddenly your bike will start wobbling from side to side. And at that speed, that's no joke. And what you need to do in this situation, I mean, the instinct is to brake, but that can sometimes make things worse. What you need to do is you need to squeeze your top tube with your knees to try to steady the bike and progressively, slowly start braking. Now, I've never encountered them personally. They sound absolutely terrifying. But if you are in that situation, just try to avoid slamming on your brakes and go, oh, this is too scary, because that will cause you to go over. Instead, just try to control it by firmly gripping the bars, squeezing the top tube with your leg, and hoping, above all hope, that helps calm the speed wobbles down. Another issue that us sort of faster triathletes have is we don't look ahead as much as we should all the time. We can end up with a head being really low in this aero position, and we can end up with sort of a stiff neck if we're in this period for prolonged periods, and we can end up with our head dropping, because it takes quite a lot of effort to hold that head up forward and be looking ahead, and we can let our head drop. Now, if you are wearing an aero helmet, this can be a bit of a disaster in itself, because if it has a bit of a tail on it, that's going to create extra drag. But as a result of our head dropping, we can end up not being able to spot hazards in the road ahead of us, and we can go straight into a hazard. Which, let's be honest, it's avoidable. If we were to, A, focus on keeping your head still, B, get more miles on the bike in training, so you can train that there's muscles associated with that, and B, if we also include strength training and yoga, the muscles around sort of our traps, our trapezius, around our upper back and our neck, if we're making sure we've got the mobility in our spine that we're looking for, these can all reduce the need for us to drop our head and not look where we're going. Some people, even their bikes are almost set up for them to be able to to be looking quite down as they ride along, because they wanted to go for the most aggressive position possible, and it's almost impossible for them to hold their head at that position. I really recommend against this. Okay, you want to make sure that you're in a position where you can look ahead and you can see what's coming, because saving 5 watts by putting yourself in a really unsustainable position where you can't see where you're going, if you end up crashing, you're going to lose a lot more time than you would have gained from those 5 watts. And the next issue is athletes taking risks in corners. Now, when you're on the limit, especially when you're leading a race, It can feel very. I've never liked being in first because you feel that you've got all these people that are chasing you, that are coming up behind you, and you feel the need to keep pushing to maintain that advantage. But don't take risks in corners because again, the chance of crashing, they are simply too high. If you do take a risk in a corner, you can end up going straight into a wall. Especially in the UK here, we have a lot of sort of low stone walls that run alongside our roads. You could go flying to one of those. You could be hit by a car that was on the other side of the road. Even if it's sort of an Ironman support vehicle or in emergency services, you have to stay on your side of the road, even in close roads events. If you end up going into a corner too hot with too much speed, you can end up bringing a very premature end to your race and your bike and all sorts of other issues surrounding that. We just have to keep in mind the big picture. If you really are pushing the limit through this corner, you might save 2 seconds or a second, but you could prematurely bring an end to your race. So you need to practice these things in training. You need to do more training outside. Probably a lot of triathletes do too much riding indoors, whilst I still do a good chunk of my riding indoors. I think that there are a number of triathletes who barely do any riding outdoors. Ahead of race day, they might only go out for a few rides on their race bike before their big day. And as a result, they just don't understand their tyres or how their bike handles or how all of these things work. And that is going to massively increase the risk of crashing in itself. So get out there, practice, and just don't take silly risks in corners. I'm not asking you to go around the corner like you're driving Miss Daisy. But I don't want you to be on the edge of the grip, desperately trying to eke out an extra second or two, because we've still got the run to go. Now, as I've mentioned previously in the episode, crashing is part of riding a bike. I'm sorry. It's just the hard truth. So I've got some tips for you here for the times that you are about to hit the deck or that you do hit the deck. So firstly, if at all possible, and I know 90% of the time this isn't possible, try to crash on the left-hand side of your bike, because that's the side, the non-drive side, without your derailleur and your cranks and the like on there. You can say it's a lot cheaper to crash on that side. If you are going over your handlebars, especially if it's in a relatively slow motion, try if you can. Again, I know this isn't always possible. Try to avoid the instinct to put your hands out in front of you, because there's a good chance you can break your wrists in doing so. If possible, just try and do a bit of a roll, a bit of a somersault. Again, I know your instinct is to protect your head. That is what most of us will do instinctively in that situation. But just again, if you have the time to think about this, which most people don't, I know I didn't at the time, try to roll with it rather than trying to put your hands out and potentially breaking your wrists. Now, you need to be very aware of concussion. This is a subject that we're having a sort of an increasing awareness of in recent years. Sports such as rugby, they've got concussion protocols now in place where they will take players off of the pitch after a big bash to assess them and make sure that they are okay to continue competing, because there are a number of players who have stepped away from these sports where there are repeated head impacts, and they have reported sort of mood swings, anger problems, all of these from repeated concussions. Now, concussion has to be taken incredibly seriously. If you take a real big whack to the head, the sort of the symptoms you need to account for prolonged headaches, nausea, especially if there's any loss of consciousness. I've had a couple of athletes who said that they've crashed their bikes and they've kind of come to at the side of the road. A&E every single time. Get that checked out, okay? Because you don't know what happened. If you've crashed your bike and lost consciousness, you need to get medical advice, okay? This isn't just me hedging my bets and saying, oh, well, to protect myself, I need to recommend you go to the hospital. You need to get there. You need to make sure there isn't anything else more serious. You need to make sure you've got no bleeding on the brain. This is a serious matter. And I'm also going to recommend that you don't jump straight back on your bike after you crash, even if it's just a little spill. Take some time, look over the bike, spin the pedals, check the bike for any cracks. especially if you're on a carbon bike, because carbon bikes, while incredibly strong, they don't like being hit or clamped or anything like that in certain directions. If you're going against the grain of the carbon, for instance, they're designed to absorb incredible impacts from potholes and hitting different surfaces. But if you were to get just like a simple clamp and clamp it around one of the tubes on your bike, chances are it would crack without too much effort at all. So this is why you need to be careful when you're when you're tightening up a seat post with a carbon bike, to make sure that you don't end up cracking the frame. But we do need to give the bike a once over, make sure everything's running okay, because the last thing you want to do is hop back straight on your bike and ride as if nothing happened, and then for the bike to to brake on you and then you crash again. I do admire, you will watch professional cycling, the Tour de France, and you can watch somebody crash on a mountain descent, and they'll get back up and they'll jump straight back on that bike and throw themselves down that hill like that crash never happened. I'm in awe at their complete lack of self-preservation. That's the word I'm looking for. But it is, at the end of the day, it is their job to be able to ride down hills fast, to catch up with the group. They want to win this event they've trained all this time for. For us, we're amateurs, it's a completely different matter. We need to stop, we need to take time, we need to make sure that we're alright. Even if it's a relatively innocuous accident, do just take the time to make sure that you're okay. If you're out cycling and you come across a cyclist who has crashed, is in distress, is injured, always pull over, always stop and ask if there's anything that you can do. Okay? If they've lost consciousness, call an ambulance straight away. We need to make sure that we're looking out for each other out there. And personally, if I was racing, if I was in a race and I came across a competitor who was injured, I would stop my race and forget all about it and do whatever I could to help that person. Now, if it's a race, there are two things that you can do. You can either turn around. If you know that you passed a marshal not too long ago, you can head back and you can report the incident. If you're the first person to arrive on the scene, I recommend that you stay with that cyclist and you instruct another athlete to go and to get help. And while you're staying with that cyclist, just be there, just hold their hand, just reassure them that it's going to be right and helps on the way, okay? This is what people need. But if they're in a state of shock, if they're in a lot of pain, just, I know that we spend a huge amount of time training for these races, but if you come across someone who's clearly injured, clearly in pain, okay, I need you to put all your performance ambitions aside and just take 10-15 minutes out of your race to be there for them when they need you the most. So that's it. I hope that you found it useful. I hope that it hasn't put you off or scared you. I just want to help ensure that people are prepared for all eventualities and they understand all the risks and how they can mitigate them. If you are cycling at a sensible speed, if you're very self-aware, if you're keeping your eyes out, and if you avoid riding in a group too much, your chance of crashing relatively slim. Again, it's been nearly a decade since I last had a crash. But that doesn't mean that I let my guard down. That doesn't mean that I'm not hyper aware of everything that's going on around me. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to crash next week, for instance. I mean, that would be quite ironic, wouldn't it? My first ride after writing this episode and I go down. Anyway, hope you found that useful. And I'm wishing you the very best of luck with your week of training ahead. And I'll see you all very soon.